Hello, Father Mark, and we are on day 51 of the Bible in a Year, with the last day of the section called Egypt and Exodus, and tomorrow we'll begin the new season, or the new section of the Bible in a Year, the Desert Wanderings. So we're finishing up the book of Exodus, chapters 39 and 40, and then we'll go to Leviticus, the last chapter of Leviticus also, chapter 27. So chapter 39 of Exodus has more laws about making things for the tabernacle and the worship. And here we have these priestly garments. And yeah, that is a very beautiful description in verse 8 and following about the high priest wears this breastplate, which has these 4 rows of stones. And they are the, 3 in each row. So you got 12. And those are similar to our idea of birthstones, but they represent the 12 tribes of Israel, and as it says, the 12 stones with their names according to the names of the sons of Israel were there on the breastpiece, so right close to the heart of the high priest as he prays to God for the people. And in verse 30, they got that description of his holy crown. He wears a crown, kind of like the bishop's mitre, and it says "Holy to the Lord" written right across it, right on it there. And so, yeah, that reminds us that a priest or a bishop, we need to be holy, and we are consecrated to the Lord, and we really represent, of course, Christ, who is the real high priest. And our priesthood has any value because we're offering him. We're united to Christ. We offer our Mass and our sacrifices, our prayers. All right, and then verse 32, it's got some vocabulary which reminds us of the first chapter of Genesis, where God created the cosmos, the world, the earth, and he looked at it, and when it was finished, those kind of words, it was finished, and he saw it, and it was good, and those are phrases that are also used in the book of Genesis. And so it is very interesting. In chapter 40 also it continues with some of that same sort of language. Starting on verse 33, we have those words again. So Moses finished the work. And there's a number of parallels that you can see between Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2 and this finishing of the tabernacle. First is that the Spirit of God is involved. We know that there were workers who were filled with the Holy Spirit who did the labor on the tabernacle tent, the tent of meeting. And then there are 7 sayings in chapter 25 and chapter 30. Chapter 31, there are 7 instructions or 7 sayings which the Lord spoke to Moses. There are 7 sayings, and you can count them there in verses 19 and following. It says, each time after it gives an explanation of what Moses was supposed to do to build this tabernacle tent, it said, as the Lord commanded, and then as the Lord commanded, verses 1, 2, on verses 19 and verse 21 and verse 23. Then again, verse 25, 27. Anyway, 7 times it mentions that phrase, and with each of these descriptions of what he was supposed to do, and then it said at the end, so Moses finished the work. So that is clearly sort of just like God created the world in 7 days, they created this tabernacle, this holy shrine, this tent of meeting in 7 stages. And then it says in verse 34 that the glory of the Lord filled the temple. And so just as the Bible does say that all of creation, God created the world as a temple, and in Isaiah chapter 6, verse 3, it says the whole earth is full of the divine glory, the glory of God. And here it says that once it was completed, the tabernacle tent was filled, the glory of the Lord filled the temple. So that just shows you that this temple and later this tent and then later the temple in Jerusalem was an abode, a place for God to dwell. And all of creation is a place for God to dwell. But this little tent or tabernacle, or as later be a temple, or our churches, they are a place where God dwells, and it represents a dwelling place for God. As we go to the last chapter of Leviticus, it's kind of an appendix, they say. In other words, that maybe 26 was originally the end of the book of Leviticus, because it kind of ends in a beautiful way with verse 42, verse 44. It says beautifully that God is promising some things for the future. I will remember my covenant with Jacob and his sons and my promises to Abraham and such. And it says in verse 44, and it kind of predicts, it kind of foreshadows the fact that there's going to be enemies later, and they're going to be taken away from the promised land when they are in the land of their enemies. That's kind of a prophecy of future difficulties, but God reassuring them already that I will be with them. I am the Lord, and I am with you. And it kind of finishes there in verse 45 with him saying that I might be their God. I will be with them, and I will remember the covenant that I might be their God. Now that, again, I've mentioned is a marriage phrase. Just like in a wedding now we say, they say, I do. Do you take this man to be your husband? I do. Well, in the Old Covenant, in the Old Testament times, it seems that the Jewish people had a phrase for a wedding, and that was, I will be your husband and you will be my bride now and forever. That's what the husband would say in a wedding ceremony. So whenever it's speaking about covenant and God says, you shall be my people and I will be your God, it was kind of a foreshadowing of a wedding. So that's a beautiful thing that we have at the end of the book of Leviticus. But then chapter 27 is a kind of an appendix. It's kind of an addition. Apparently it was thought necessary later to add this, perhaps, that what the Lord said about votive offerings. Votive offerings were one of the kinds of peace offerings. Peace offerings were the only sacrifices where the people would bring it and they could actually give it, and the priest would sacrifice parts of the animal to God or burn it, or the priest would eat parts of it, but part of it you could take home and eat with your family. And there were three kinds of peace offerings. There could be a thanksgiving or a free will or a votive. And a votive was something that related to a vow. It was a vow. It was you made a promise. As Father Michael Schmitz says, you kind of decide to give something to the Lord generously, and you shouldn't be taking it back. You should offer it. And so these are the kinds of things that people would do. And all of these peace offerings are voluntary. It's only if the Lord puts it into someone's heart that they would do this. If you are inspired, if you want to give something beyond what is absolutely required, then you give these kinds of offerings. And so these are very wonderful kinds of offerings, whether it was offering your service, as it says there, as a worker in the temple, for a certain, you could offer an amount of money, because actually the person himself, if they're not a Levite, they can't really go into the temple and work, but you could offer a certain amount of silver or coins or shekels to represent that. And this was a free will gift to the Lord.